I'm running for president because I think we need someone who's saying the most obvious thing in the world, which is our government is broken. Our Congress is broken. We don't have a system that responds to the ordinary voter. We live in a system where the tiniest fraction of the 1% fund the campaigns that the candidates rely on to get elected. The tiniest fraction. 400 Americans have given half the money in this election cycle so far. That's not American democracy, that's banana republic democracy. Yanni Slav, my sponsors. I don't know who my sponsors are because the way we funded this campaign is crowdsourced it in a Kickstarter-like way. I said if we raised $1 million in less than 30 days, I would run. And if we raised that money, then the campaign was on. If we didn't, then I was going to give the money back. We did it, and now I'm running. And the money we take is only from citizens. We can't take any PAC money. We can't take any foreign money. We don't take any corporate money. So David, your question is exactly the right question. What we need to do is to rally America to insist on fixing that system. So the difference between my candidacy and theirs is that I want to run a campaign that raises above the partisan divide in America today, to rally people to a point that every American, whether you're Republican, Independent, or Democrat, ought to agree with, that we ought to have a representative democracy that represents us equally. And if we can rally America to that, I think we have the power, the mandate enough to force that Congress to fix itself. And if we don't, if we just have a regular partisan election, then what we'll see for the next 4 years, the next 8 years, is more stalemate, more partisan stalemate. Nothing will happen. And for the Democrats, the party which is the party of yes, the party that has ideas that they want America to adopt, that would be a disaster. And that is exactly why I'm running. Myles, you're asking me the hardest question for this campaign because what we found as I've announced this idea of the referendum president is people get very focused on the resignation part and they miss the critical middle step, which is we pass the most important civil rights legislation in 50 years. Now, obviously, the vice president's important regardless of who the president is. And I want a vice president who excites the Democratic base in a way that brings this party alive enough to be able to win in the general election. The people who've done that so far, I think, are people like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. These are exactly the kind of people, I think, who would make this ticket irresistible to most Americans. Jose, I think the assassination of JFK, of course, is part of 3 major assassinations in that decade, which, because of the tragedy, all of them produced. Assassination of Dr. King and the 2 Kennedy brothers forces us constantly to imagine it can't just be crazy people who did this. I fear the belief that many people have that it is something more. The government, in fact, is behind the Kennedy assassinations and the King assassinations. And I believe we have a duty to try to make it possible for people to believe the truth, if in fact the truth is that it is a bunch of crazy people who did what was done. So I would love the government to be as transparent as it possibly could to end as much as it can any of these skepticism. So Michael, I think Donald Trump has done the best of things and the worst of things. The best of things is, in the Republican Party, he pulled back the curtain on the way money corrupts the system. Standing on the debate stage, calling out every one of those candidates for president, emphasizing the way all of them were dependent on large donors to fund their campaigns, because it brought all of us to recognize, in a cross-partisan way, the corrupting influence of money in politics. But he's been the worst of influences, too. His appeal to the worst of America through the hatred he's expressed to immigrants in America, I think is outrageous. And I think it demeans the American political process. To imagine a candidate as prominent as he, appealing to this base and horrible part of America. And I think more fundamentally, we need to recognize Donald Trump's ability to be a candidate like this raises the question of how we allow the political process to be captured and manipulated, and whether we should have a better system for making sure that participation and media covers politics so that America gets a broader view of who these candidates are. So Kevin, Bernie's campaign and my campaign are fundamentally different. Bernie is identifying all the amazing things that we as Americans have to do. And most of the things he's talking about, I completely agree with. But he is not given a plan for how he's going to fix this corrupted system. He is not. He has not committed himself to fixing this corrupted system first. He's identified the problems of corruption. He's pointed to the right answers, but checking off a box is not a plan. And what I've said is we have to commit ourselves to fixing this democracy first, if any of these amazing ideas that he's talking about are even possible. So my referendum presidency is about making it possible for somebody like Bernie Sanders to actually achieve what he's talking about he wants to achieve. Alan, it's incredibly important for me to get into debates. There's no campaign if I can't get into the first or the second debate. So we're working as hard as we can to make it possible to be in that debate. But how to do it is a really hard question. I'm not a politician, and what they've done is set up rules where politicians presumptively get to be on that stage. I'm not a billionaire, so I can't force myself on stage by spending millions of dollars to get the name recognition necessary to get above their arbitrary cutoff percentage. This is a serious campaign, yet it's an outsider's campaign. And the challenge for an outsider's campaign is to force the insider to let us on stage. And so far, they've not allowed us to be on that stage. Charisma, the fundamental focus of my campaign is to restore equality to this political system. I think the Black Lives Matter movement is the most important political movement to remind America about how it has betrayed its fundamental commitment. Of course, when America was born, we had betrayed that commitment through slavery. But then after 150 years of fighting to end slavery, a battle that began when the first black slave was brought to America and put in chains, we finally ended that sin in America. But it took 100 years before we could actually deliver on the promise of equal rights, 100 years before finally there was a Civil Rights Act that actually protected African Americans from discrimination, and a Voting Rights Act that actually gave them the right to vote. But for the last 50 years, we have betrayed the promise of those civil rights statutes. And the product is a world where we have radical inequality, and radical inequality that is clearly identifiable on the basis of race. We have betrayed the promise that we made. That promise is finally something we have to deliver on. So Joshua, the NRA has power for two different reasons. One reason it has power is that there are many Americans who believe fundamentally in what they understand the Second Amendment to guarantee them the right to bear arms. And those people vote. They are powerful influence in our political system because they exercise their political power regularly and reliably. But the second reason the NRA has power is the incredible amount of money which the gun companies feed to the NRA, both to support that organization and also support the work, the political work of that organization. But in a system where 89% of Americans support background checks, removing this ridiculous exemption for private sales of guns which exempt about 40% of sales from background checks. In a world where 89% support that and the president can't even get that passed, that's not because a bunch of people are voting. That's because there's tons of money in the system that is improperly in the system, and we have to find a way to change that. So Logan, I think I might be the most liberal drug decriminalization person in this campaign. I think we've wasted an extraordinary amount of money and human lives in this ridiculous war on drugs. A war which has not only destroyed whole communities in the United States, but destroyed whole countries in South America and across the world. And so I would move as aggressively as I could to stop this war and to decriminalize in a way that facilitated the ending of this black market destructive economy. So yes, I would support legalization of cannabis at the federal level. I would encourage safety regulations of that drug so that when people consumed it, they had some confidence they were consuming safe drugs as opposed to drugs that had tainted material, which many drugs in the black market do. And I would admit that we live in a society where people want to experiment in that way, and we should not criminalize that behavior because it's not them we should be worrying about. It's the incredible war and the costs of that war that should be the focus of federal policy. Hello Soil from Twitter, which is an interesting name. I think student debt is one of the most important problems to confront. And I think to confront it, we're going to have to fundamentally change the way our system works. Here's the reality. If we take on student debt, we take on the most powerful political interest in America today. Those banks who defend this system where they have guaranteed loans yet charge incredibly high interest rates to the borrowers are going to fight this reform with every ounce of energy they've got. And so if we're going to have a chance to win, we have to change the system where they have so much power. Not because of the number of votes they can cast, because of a corporation, of course, can't cast votes. But we have to change the fact that they have power because of the money they can deploy inside the system. So Juan, my view about immigration is perhaps the most radically inclusive view about immigration of any of the candidates who are running for president. Let's start with what the word Americans mean. I think we have an extraordinary number of Americans who are not citizens of America. They are people who come to this country, they devote their life to this country, their dreams and their future are tied to this country. They work in the Central Valley of California for incredibly low wages, terrible working conditions, environments that give them cancer and cause their children incredible burdens. They live all across the middle part of the United States. They live in Miami as they build a culture and a community in Miami which is distinctive but tied to America. These are all Americans. And my view is our government should work as hard as it can to give these Americans the right to be citizens, all of them. I would be as inclusive as possible. I wouldn't include people who have come to this country and committed crimes, come to this country and done harm, come to this country and are a threat to that country. Those are legitimate reasons not to include people within our political society. But we have no right, we, white Americans, who came to this country without a visa, who came to this country without the permission of the Native Americans who were here in this country, we have no right to exclude others from this country in the way that we have in the past 50 years.